Can people hear me now watching the stream? I'm just reading the comments. Oh yes, people can hear me. I can hear myself. Okay, then we can start. So thank you very much for coming. I'm super excited to see you all here. It's really, really amazing to have you here and have this Rasa Summit happening. So today's agenda is looks like that. So we are going to start with a series of presentations about Rasa so that you get all Rasa'd. So we will have updates on community, on the company's roadmap, as well as some exciting updates and news on Rasa, NLU, and Core. And then we are going to have a really cool presentation from Edward from N26. He is going to talk about one of his projects. And then we will have time to answer all of your questions. And after that, we will have an epic Rasa party. So I will start. I will first introduce myself. I'm Juste, and I work at Rasa as a developer advocate. So I focus on building Rasa open source community, and I focus on developer education at Rasa. So I'm super excited to see Rasa community growing, and here are some updates that I would like to share with you. So I will start with community numbers, and we have quite exciting ones. So since Rasa is open source, it has quite a big community already. We have over 100K downloads for Rasa, NLU, and Core. Recently, we switched to a new community platform called Rasa Forum, actually just probably a month ago. And I'm really excited to see that by now we have over 1,100 members there. And that is super exciting to me because actually I did a presentation just a week ago where I showed similar numbers, and over there I only showed 1,000. So I'm super excited to see how quickly these numbers change and how quickly our community grows. And another metric that is also really, really exciting is how many contributors we have, because since Rasa is open source and it strives from open source contributions, it's amazing to see that we have over 150 contributors for Rasa, NLU, and Core. So really exciting, and thank you very much for that. And I'm really hoping that these numbers will grow even more. The main place where Rasa community meets right now is Rasa Forum, so I hope you all are part of it. If not, hopefully you will join. And this is the place where people can ask questions and get answers, join discussions. Also, this is the place where we share all the updates, what is happening at Rasa, what are the events happening, and also community started sharing exciting events that they are organizing. So for example, we have Rasa communities in different areas, so really exciting to see people advocating for Rasa in their cities and countries as well. So yeah, join Rasa Forum if you haven't done so. This is also super exciting, is that Rasa is definitely a global community of makers and conversational AI enthusiasts. And I'm super happy to see this map almost all covered with Rasa colors, and you can see quite big communities in US and India, and Brazil is also quite big, and of course Germany. So hopefully we are going to have entire map covered quite soon. And another thing that is really exciting for me is that we actually have some local communities as well. So just a few days ago, I came back from, I was in New York City where we had first Rasa user meetup over there. We also have booming community in Brazil. A lot of people are creating amazing content about Rasa and working on interesting projects, collaborating and advocating for Rasa. Another community is in India. They had their first Rasa meetup on Saturday, and I had an honor to join that remotely. But it was really exciting to see people getting together and building something cool with Rasa and speaking about it. And also we have a local community in China, And one of our hero contributors is a moderator of this community. So super exciting to see how many cool things people are doing. And I really hope, again, that we are going to have a lot more pointers in months or years to come. It's really hard to highlight all the amazing contributions that our community does, but code contributions are super important, and these are just a few random ones. I didn't pick them to show based on their importance or because they are all amazing, but you can see that people do add a lot to our code base by creating the different connectors, by improving our models and making it easier to use Rasa stack. But code is also is not the only way to contribute. There are so much to it, to contributions, and I just wanted to highlight that there are a lot of people who are creating really cool content, and that's also super important for us because it helps developers to learn more about Rasa and use Rasa easier. So these are, again, just a few examples of loads of really cool tutorials and content that people share, not only on their own blog posts, but for example, this one here up top comes from our forum. So it's amazing to see that people also use this platform to share their knowledge. And where it all leads, so we try to recognize our contributors and reward them and let them know that we really appreciate their contributions. So we have Rasa Heroes, which is a group of contributors who have made multiple high-quality contributions, and they all meet on a special Slack channel where they can discuss things and where they can get sneak peeks into new Rasa features, and we really value their feedback and help us push Rasa forward. So those who are contributing a lot and who are making really high-quality and valuable contributions will definitely end up in Rasa Hero Group. So this is just an incentive for people to contribute more to Rasa as well. And there are, again, as I mentioned, so many different ways how you can contribute. It's not, of course, code is super important, and it's something that we value a lot. So if you are a beginner and you want to start contributing, the best place is to go on GitHub and check out labels, because we do label issues on GitHub. So check out the labels like good first issue or help needed. Like these are the first issues you could look into and try to make your own make your first contributions. You can also write a lot of examples and collaborate with others on projects. And as I have mentioned previously, content is also really important and valuable contribution. So you can help others on the forum, you can write tutorials, you can create other content. There are so many different ways how you can contribute. So please do, and definitely let us know when you do, because we would love to know that and recognize and maybe award you in different ways. So yeah, I will finish my part with my highlight line that I usually use speaking about community, which is Go Rasa, Go Community. It's really amazing to see how it grows, and I hope it's going to continue in the future. So thanks. And now we are going to have a presentation from Alan, who is our CTO and co-founder, who is going to talk about the roadmap of Rasa.
Cool. Yeah, so I have the pleasure of talking a little bit about our roadmap. So some of these are things that we have been working on where we still need a little bit more input. Some things are coming out in the future. And I hope and expect that people have some questions about it. We'll want to talk about it and start some discussions. So we have the Ask Us Anything as the sort of final agenda point for this evening. So if you have sort of more in-depth questions, maybe that's the time for it. But if you have any kind of urgent questions, we can also do that here. So, I mean, the first thing I'll say is something that we really believe at Rasa, which is that conversational AI is really hard, and we haven't solved it or come and arrived with a sort of fully fledged solution, and it's very much an ongoing process of inventing what's next. And the way we think about inventing what's next is we think of what's currently out of reach, what's currently not possible to build, and how do we enable that, right? So we like to think of everything in terms of blockers. Where are people currently blocked? So since we did the last community event in May, we started formalizing this around the major blockers that we think are the most important things. And these are some of the ones we came up with back then. So one was combining business logic and machine learning, especially with respect to Rasa core. Then coming up with better ways of measuring generalization. So from the training stories that you have, how well you're generalizing to the new ones. And then, of course, being able to define what is the successful conversation and tracking that. QA and testing, you know, a lot of these things, which are totally standard for regular software. If you're deploying machine learning models, you know, it's not really there yet. So that's obviously an interesting issue. Handling out of scope messages, doesn't matter how much training data you have, users will always send you something that you weren't expecting and hadn't seen before. So dealing with that, recognizing that, and dealing with it gracefully. And then something we see especially a lot from the community and from people building things with Rasa is thinking ahead about how do we scale out, right? If we now have lots of different use cases that we want to serve with our conversational AI. So some of these I'll talk about things we've already done and things we're going to do in the future. Some I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to anticipate too much what Tom and Akila are going to talk about. And some are really still open issues because, you know, we can't solve everything at once. So the first topic, and we'll do a deep dive on this in Akila and Tom's talk, is the new forms. So maybe put your hand up if you ever used the old form actions in Rasa core. Not many people, just a couple. The new ones are a lot better. And that also means that we're going to deprecate the old ones in Rasa core 12 when this gets merged. So, I mean, I think the easiest way to pose the problem is this, right? So in Rasa core, of course, you learn from real conversations how to have conversations. But then what if some things, you know, you don't want to learn? So, you know, imagine this scenario, your marketing department comes and says, okay, we have a new special offer for everybody under 26, and you now need to ask every user their age. And you never had any conversations in the past where you ask people their age. So does that mean that all your old training data is now useless and invalid, or do you have to go and manually edit it all? Neither of those things are really good scenarios. So the thing you want to do is you want to separate out that logical piece of like, these are the questions I need to ask, from here's how I deal with all the deviations from the happy path, which you want to learn, rather than kind of infinitely code in. So we've come up with, I think, a fairly general mechanism for handling this. And Akila will be talking about how it works and how you implement it and what are the things to think about when you use it. But the biggest thing we need really is feedback. So we really need people to try it out, give it a go, kick the tires on it, try and break it as hard as you can, and come back to us and say, well, you know, this doesn't serve my use case because of X, Y, and Z. But this is a really important one, and I'm really glad that we've got, I think, quite a good solution for it. Another one is around evaluation. So this touches on a bunch of different topics, including, of course, QA, but also including like generalization and splitting kind of train and test stories and measuring performance there. So we have a very much improved Rasa core.evaluate script. So it can do a bunch of things now. So it does end-to-end testing of Rasa NLU and core together. So you can write stories with real user utterances in there, and it will test end-to-end that the NLU was correct and core did the correct thing. You have new functionality for having a test set and a training set and progressively training with different subsets of your training set and comparing different policies to help you pick hyperparameters, help you pick what's a good policy, all of that important stuff. And yeah, and we also have some you know, scripts for creating nice plots of kind of measuring how well you're generalizing and things like that. So again, the ball is in your court, as it were. Please try it out and give us some feedback, especially, you know, when you're thinking about, is this really useful for me, or what else do you need? And this is a figure from a recent paper of ours, which we already kind of hinted at last time. And that is also what the paper is about, which is generalization across multiple tasks. So one of the core pieces is you have, you know, N tasks that you're helping users with, and all of them have an infinite number of ways that users can deviate from what you really had in mind, right? So you want to learn how to deal with those unhappy paths from real examples, and then you want to reuse that knowledge in a new context, right? So you want to reuse these general dialogue patterns. And so here's an example of one that is very closely related to what we do in the paper, where here, we do a flight booking task, and we ask the user to confirm something. In this case, should we book their flights? And instead of just saying yes or no, they ask, what's the weather like over there? Right, so the general pattern here is you want to acknowledge and respond to what the user asked for, and then you want to bring them back to the task at hand. And so in this case, you want to respond and then say, shall I book your flights now? And then continue down. And then the task is that we set up in the paper is, can you learn a general pattern like that and reuse it to a different task? So you now have a different action you need to predict, which is not about flights, but it's still confirming, right? And you want to confirm now that it's your hotel, and then kind of reuse that pattern to bring people back, so that you don't have to have every combination of every user goal and every possible deviation. So that's a large part of course, generalization and building systems that are more scalable, so you don't have to have rules for all of these possible cases. And that's what the embedding policy does. So this is what the paper is about, but it's also already in Rasa Core. It was shipped in version 0.11. The architecture is rather fancy. We obviously won't go into the details, but it's the curve on top. So the take-home message, sorry? The take-home message is it does some things very, very well that other policies can't do. So the Keras, which is kind of the standard Rasa Core policy, is the baseline there. And there's a significant increase in performance. So we'll put this up on archive soon as well, so that you can all see what went into it, but you can already use the code and look into it and play around with it. And all the scripts to reproduce these figures are also open source. So the next step is, this is on us and on you, to really push this to the breaking point and see what it can't learn, right? Because every model has its limitations. And so we want to find cases where this breaks, and we need to think of the next thing again. Out of scope messages are tricky. They still are tricky. So what we found was that actually with the TensorFlow embedding pipeline in Rasa NLU, it works actually reasonably robustly, because one of the biggest problems with classifying an out of scope intent robustly with, for example, like the Spacey pipeline, is that the words, you're going to have some kind of word vectors for all these words which users said, which have never occurred in any of your other training data, and you just don't know exactly which directions your model is going to pick out, and so there's no way to really robustly know that it won't just classify them as one of your intents. With the TensorFlow embedding pipeline, because you don't have any pre-trained word embeddings, it's rather straightforward, because all these new words just are zeros or out of vocab tokens. So that's a pretty clear signal that this is out of scope. So for the sort of training embeddings from scratch approach, out of scope seems to work pretty well. And we were playing around with looking at the embeddings, what are really the intent embeddings and the word embeddings that are learned. Seems to work quite robustly for the TensorFlow embedding. But doing it robustly with pre-trained word embeddings is still very much a challenge, and still something that we're working on. And one thing that may help there is moving from a purely word embedding sort of bag of words approach to looking at the sentence embeddings, which has been an active topic in NLP for the last year or so. So this is still very much an ongoing topic, looking at density estimation, methods for outlier detection, trying to figure out what's a robust way of detecting out of scope things when every word that comes in does have a representation. And then another one that's an ongoing topic is, how do we define conversation success? So the real measure, of course, of is your model improving? Are you learning useful things from your users? Are a larger fraction of the conversations that you have successful, right? And it's of course very use case dependent what defines successful conversations. Sometimes it's really easy, right? Maybe you want to minimize the number of times the fallback action is called. That's kind of an obvious case. maybe there are specific intents that you want to look out for, people asking to speak to a human, or swearing at you, or yeah, I mean, some other subtler form of sentiment. Or maybe it's more of a kind of time-based query that a user expresses a particular goal, and then the action that corresponds to that goal being met is never called. So you want to do a kind of time-based query. So we need your input here. There's obviously no sort of right answer, so we need to give everybody the tools that let them define what are the successful conversations and measure them and track them over time. And that's, of course, an important part of seeing if what you're learning from your new conversations is helping you. So that's an ongoing topic as well. Cool. So that's it from me. So we'll go on to Tom and Akila next. Thanks. All right, so Ellen talked a lot about the high-level topics, and now we're going to deep dive into a couple of the kind of newer features that I think most of them aren't even released yet, so they're still on the master branch. So as Ellen said, we really like your input on them and kind of try them out and see how they work for you. Here's a couple of them. I'm going to deep dive into 3 of them, but these are 3 others that I'd like to highlight because I think they're quite changing how at least we at Rasa and other people reuse Rasa Core. So the first one is defining models as configuration. So instead of kind of creating custom code to define your policies and your models, you can then define your models in a configuration file, create multiple of them, test multiple of them against your data, right? Comparing the different models. That's the whole idea. So no custom code there, but just configuration files. Which is really cool because it allows us to create Docker files, just mounting these configuration files and kind of training the model inside of them, and then kind of spinning the model up and then running inside that kind of pre-built Docker container without like any requirement of custom code. The second one is a single Docker, a single command to spin up a Docker container cluster, right? So what we want to do is we want to prepare a Docker compose that kind of spins up Docker, runs Rasa Core, Rasa NLU, Duckling, and kind of your application server for custom code, so that really the only thing you need to do is provide that custom core, the custom container for your actions for Rasa Core, and then you're kind of ready to go, right? And then obviously you need to add training data, create your domain, but you don't need to install it locally or install it on a remote machine when you want to test something out, right? You can just use Docker there, which is, I think, quite neat in terms of like setting things up and moving things quickly. The last one is composite entities. So it's a rather new PR. I think I saw yesterday. So this is kind of in the early stage, but it's kind of a really interesting possibility to like have composite entities in LLU and classify them, and then kind of cluster them in larger entities and use kind of these pre-trained entities like numbers to form larger entities, like for example, streets that contain these numbers. All right, now I want to like deep dive into the 3 features. So first of all, I want to talk about interactive learning, right? It has been a feature that's been around for, I think, from the beginning nearly. But actually, we didn't really polish it very well. So it was there, but it wasn't really usable. So we set out to improve that, and it's still an ongoing process. And the whole idea there is, so instead of writing stories by hand or training data, what if we just can talk to the bot, and while doing so, really create our new training data? Because it's quite hard to create these stories, especially when we add like forms and additional logic there. Really creating these stories in the right format, not missing any actions, not missing any slots or any events is quite tricky. And as soon as you miss them, the training data is off and not kind of representing any more kind of the real world. So using interactive learning, chatting with the bot and generating training from that, data from that, is kind of a solution to that. Yeah, so let's see what we've come up with until now. So let's go here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the moodbot example. I'm going to start a training script, like passing in some training data, some initial training data, a pre-trained Rasa NLU model,
also a trained Rasa core model, a pre-trained model, my domain file as usual, and then interactive as a flag to activate this interactive learning mode. And then we're going to train that model for 2 epochs, which is quite short. So the model itself is not really clever, but hopefully it will do for the demo. So yeah, now we have the input, and we now can chat to the bot. So I can now send a message like hi. Let's move that a little bit further up. All right. So the bot recognized that it's greet, which is correct. So I can now confirm that. And it will show me the history of the conversation. It will show me what the bot did. So it listened. It will show me what I said. In this case, hi. It will show me what got classified as well as confidence. And this is kind of the interaction you have with the bot. So you write messages, and then you confirm all the predictions the bot does. So in this case, it's utter greet, which is also correct. So now the conversation is, I said hi. The bot said, hi, how are you? I'll do that larger. Hey, how are you? Great, super sad. So on Facebook, this, for example, would be buttons, but here it's not. So I'm going to say, oh yeah, action listen is correct. And now I can input new stuff. So I'm great. So this mood great, which is correct as well. And you can see the conversation continues. So utter happy is fine as well. And then action listen. And then I'm going to do see ya. And now it says greet, right? So that is incorrect. So I want that to be goodbye. So just say no. And then I can select goodbye in this case. And now I can also annotate any additional entities, right? In this case, there's no entity, so I don't need to annotate anything, but I could, for example, I had a name entity. I could also annotate that here if that prediction is wrong. But let's not do that. Just use see you. And now the bot wants to do utter goodbye, which sounds great. And it wants to listen. Right, so this is like the whole interaction. You chat with the bot, then you can confirm or deny what it's doing, and kind of all these predictions are then dumped as new training data files. And you can train your new model on that, which hopefully yields an improved bot. We also build in a couple more features. For example, you can go back, so undoing the last thing. And I also want to undo the utter goodbye in this case. So let's say instead of doing goodbye, I want to do happy. So the bot says first, great, carry on, and then wants to do restart. No? I want to do goodbye. So in this case, now I say see ya, and the bot says great, carry on, and then bye.
So here you are training core and NLP at the same time.
This is using pre-trained models, so it's not kind of training them live.
But the output of the files that you get is
yes. Yeah. So there will be one training file for dialogues, which are kind of stories,
yeah.
And then there will be one output, which is an NLU training file containing like any intent entity examples are corrected. So in this case, I want to do listen. Okay, so this is kind of the interaction. And then we added another feature. Oh, no, I don't want to continue. So we also added a visualization for that. So in the beginning, when you start the interactive learning, it will show the URL, but I already opened it. So basically, when you go here, I'll reload that, hopefully. Yes. So it will show the conversation graph. So kind of where we are in the conversation. At the top is like the start, and then it's my first message is hi, utter greet, then I'm great. Kind of you can see like the path I'm going down in that conversation tree. And the idea here is to show other conversations that are close to yours in that graph. To kind of help you generate training data. So you can see, okay, in that place, someone else already said this message or used this intent, so I don't need to create a training sample. So which should be really helpful in the beginning. So what we can do is, it's what we call fork, which means I want to go back in the conversation, And instead of using my messages that I just typed, I'm just gonna roll back the whole conversation until that previous point and then go into another direction. So I want to go back to the I am great, right? So at that point, I said hi, and the bot said, hey, how are you? And now instead of typing I'm great, I might say, not so good. Okay, now my window is too small here because the font is too large. Okay, mood unhappy, that sounds good. Right, and you can see that the conversation graph now updates. We're at a different location now. We're again at utter green, and we can see all the different paths that go down. And we can basically generate new training data at the same time having kind of an eye and sometimes looking at the visualization to see kind of how the whole conversational tree looks like. And it kind of, when we're finished, we would then do, okay, export and quit. And then we can see, okay, the first thing that gets exported are these stories. Then we have any additional NLU data that gets written to file and up with that, right? And then kind of that is the persistent training data we can later use to retrain the model. So yeah, this is kind of the start. So we created that, but there's still a lot of different ways to like extend that. The command line is like kind of a limited interface, so it's really interesting to play around with that. Kind of what is it that you need to display, need to do to really make that interaction work. So some additional things we could imagine are additional information in the visualization, like confidences, like how many conversations are in each part of the tree, but also kind of starting from zero, right? Because right now, when you want to use interactive learning, you need to have a predefined domain, right? You need to have your domain, you need to have your actions. So you can't really start from scratch. You need to have like kind of these predefined files. So what would be interesting to see is kind of, can we create actions? Can we create intents in there? Can we specify the utterances in there to kind of go from zero to creating your bot in that interactive learning mode, creating like the necessary files, training data, setting everything up to make that really, really easy. And then something kind of more advanced later on, can we also suggest conversations that would be useful for the bot to explore? So kind of, where's the bot unsure about what to do next? And then kind of suggesting that as a conversation for the user to use for interactive learning, kind of suggesting what is the correct path, what is the next action to take in this situation. Because that training data would hopefully improve the bot the most. Yeah, so give that a try. It's Merchant Master. Share your ideas, how we can go from there, how we can improve that, and how we can make it even better. Another point I want to talk about is evaluation. So Alan mentioned that before. It's really hard to know what the bot is doing after you've trained it multiple times. So is it, for example, still doing the right thing? So what we want to be sure of is that a model works, right? We retrain on more data and then kind of the model changed, but does it still perform the same or did it unlearn something? And we want to like make sure that we have certain conversations that always work. To kind of, I mean, it's pretty similar to software engineering and writing tests, right? You want to make sure that certain parts of your code, and in this case, certain parts of your conversation always work. A second question we might want to answer is, what is the best model we can choose, right? We do have different policies, right? We have the embedding policy Alan mentioned, we have the carrots policy, and so we need to figure out which one works best on our data set. And there's probably going to be more policies in the future. Another question is, what are the issues of the model? So I train a model, I have some data now, kind of how can I improve that model further? Where does it break? Where do I need to create more training data? But we won't replace data scientists, so there's still more stuff to explore. All right, so let's take a look at that part as well. So yeah, so what we do to use the testing part is we're going to create these test stories. They look pretty much like normal stories. The difference only is that they include utterances. So if you want to test end-to-end, so kind of from user message to action prediction, we need the actual user message, which we usually don't have in these stories. So in this case, what we can see here is that we have the intent greet, as well as the actual utterance the user sends, in this case, hello. And then we have our usual, okay, this is the next action, and then we do have the next intent from the user, next message from the user. And we can now use this data and feed it into my second example. And as you can see, yeah, it's calling the evaluate script Alan mentioned before. So we added a couple more parameters to that, for example, end-to-end, which kind of tests these NLU phrases that are part of the story file. You need to pass in a trained LLU model, you need to pass in a trained dialogue model, and then also obviously the test stories that we want to try out and that we kind of want to test our model on. And then there's a lot of output here, bigger. So what we can see is that this is the result end-to-end, right? So we had 3 stories here, right? Happy path, and failing NLU. And kind of one of them succeeded and 2 of them failed. So we end up with an accuracy of like 0, 3. We can also see the evaluation on the action level. So 13 of 17 action predictions, actually, we got them correct. And what you can see is that even though we have an action level prediction of 81%, we're still failing at 2 of 3 conversations. Then we can also see like action specific evaluations and also kind of a plot, confusion matrix of the different actions. We can't read the titles, but basically on each axis, all the actions, and then kind of the predictions of our model. And we also output the failed stories now. So what you can see here is all the stories that didn't succeed. So in these stories, the bot made a mistake at any point. So in the story up here, we can see that the NLU prediction was wrong, right? So the actual intent should have been goodbye, but the model predicted thank you. And then it also predicted the wrong action. So it should have been utter goodbye, but it was utter on it. So the benefit here is that you get the stories in the correct format again. You can just add them to the training data again. But you can also see kind of what the wrong prediction is and kind of also at which point in time of the conversation. All right, so let's take a look at the slides again. Cool, yeah, so something Ellen showed before as well. I can't show that live now because the training takes longer, because we need to train multiple models and evaluate them. So these are kind of the commands you use. So just a normal training command, but mode compare, and same for the NLU command. So it will train multiple models and then kind of evaluate multiple models on your training data or on the test data, and then plot kind of graphs and some statistics to like check, okay, which of the models is performing best, to kind of suggest which one you should be using. So yeah, so we added a couple things to that evaluation part, right? We've seen the end-to-end testing, so NLU, intents, entities, actions, all of these things are getting tested now. There's also a flag that you can activate that will fail like the script run. So the script will exit with a non-zero exit code. It's really useful for CI testing. So you can have a couple stories in a test file, run that on CI, test your model to see if it's still working correctly. And the last script, obviously, comparing different policies on the same data. So working on that to make it super easy as well. So yeah, try it out as well and share your ideas. Here the same. Really like to hear your feedback on these ideas. All right, so for the last part, I'd like to introduce you to Akila, one of our machine learning engineers, and she's going to be talking about the second generation forums I mentioned before.
That's mine now.
Oh, yeah, I need to know seconds.
That's mine? Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about second generation forms. So as Alan mentioned, we came up with a bunch of blockers, and one of those was business logic and ML. So we decided to tackle that one because we get it a lot from our customers that you just want to handle some paths by a strict logic. So if you're filling out like an insurance form or something where you need like the user's name and birthday and stuff to authenticate them, you want that to be handled by rules rather than machine learning. So yeah, we're doing this with forms, and so the idea of this is that you should be able to build the happy path for this quickly. So you should be able to just write like a 3-line story, and that should just work for all the slots that you want to fill, rather than having to type a bunch of all the different variations of stories there are. And another point we wanted to have is being able to modify the information needed easily. So yeah, again, instead of having to rewrite all your stories, you just want to be able to add one line of code that says ask for their gender as well now. But we think that like handling the unhappy paths, that should still be done with machine learning, and it should still be learned from real data. So you shouldn't come up with all these hypotheticals of interjections and stuff, but you should actually look at the conversations your users are having with your bot. So yeah, so the idea is to be able to just have one story to define the happy path. So as when Alan asked earlier whether some of you have used forms, I'm sure you're familiar with this confusing story where you write out all the steps for it, and it's basically just repeating calling the form action over and over again. And as soon as you enter, say, like both the number of people and cuisine at the same time, this form would break. Whereas in the new version, you just write these 4 lines, and that should work for all the happy paths. So this is what the form action looks like. It's just a custom action as well, but it has a few additional methods. So there's the required slots method, which is the list of slots that you want to ask the user for. Then you have a slot mapping where you can basically say either that you just want to take the entity to fill the slot, or you could also take a whole message or have an intent map to a particular value. And then there's also the request next slot function, which you can define some custom logic in. So say if the user is under 18, you want to ask a few additional questions. And then there's also an additional function that you don't need to define, but if you want to validate your input, say you only accept, like if you have a restaurant bot and you only accept a certain amount of cuisines, you can then define that there and reject the user input if it's something else. And so the standard implementation of this is just that if the slot doesn't get filled, it will raise this action execution rejection error. And what that means is that the model then falls back to towards like machine learning prediction. Cool. Yeah, let's take a quick look at how the form policy works as well. It's just, can everyone see that? Hopefully, yeah. It's a really simple concept. So basically what it does is if the latest action was listen, it will it'll predict itself. And if the latest action was the form, then it'll predict action listen. So basically it'll just keep predicting itself until the form is filled. And now, yeah, now we can look at a quick demo. So, yeah, can everyone see this? Yes. Okay. Yeah, so I'm sure most of you have looked at our docs at some point, and there's the restaurant bot example. So we converted this into a form bot as well. So as you can see here, you define the required slots, so like cuisine, number of people, and outdoor seating, and so on. And then you can define in this slot mapping function that the cuisine you want from the entity. But then, for example, for preferences, you just want to accept any text. Say if they need like I don't know, if they have a child with them and they want to bring an extra chair or something. So that's not really an entity, but just a full user message. And then there's also some input validation here, where say if you have the cuisine slot and the cuisine you want isn't in your list of accepted cuisines, then prompts the user to enter your input again. And yeah, so on the left here, this is the happy path, where it's just these 4 lines basically of saying the form has started, and then it goes through all the process, and then it ends. And then as soon as you want to handle something that isn't like part of your form, say the user asks for the weather or something, you would add a story like this that adds basically the user's interjection. So I'll show you quickly what that looks like when you're talking to the bot. Cool. So there's no NLU model loaded here, but basically say the user wants to book a restaurant. So you start the form with that. Yeah, the first thing it asks you is what cuisine. So say I enter a non-existent cuisine like Rasa. It will then say, yeah, the cuisine doesn't exist, so please try again. So you see the bottom of that? Yeah. So yeah, now we enter an existing cuisine, so Greek, for example, so that accepts that and goes on. And yeah, so we want to book it for, no, sorry, it's number, because yeah, this is the case where you have an entity of a different name. So like if you're using duckling to extract numbers, it would then store this in the number of people slot. Yeah, and then do you want to sit outside? Say no. And we don't have any additional preferences. Now say at this point, the user wants to ask for the weather for some reason. So we say chit chat. Okay, that didn't work. Yeah, so at that point, it accepts any input because it's just like, you're just giving some feedback. But the idea there was that it should have responded with chit chat. But yeah, so you can see here it's filled all the slots now. So the cuisine is Greek, number of people too. And with the outdoor seating, it's mapped the intent denied to false. And yeah, for the feedback, it just took anything because you just want to get some user feedback. Cool. Yeah, so yeah, that's it from me. And there's no next step thing there, but as Alan said already, we'd love to get your feedback on it as well, because we're just about to merge it because we're still refining some things, but yeah. Cool. Yeah, so next we have Edward from N26.
You said that you already. Okay. Cool.
You can check on my phone. You can check on my phone.
Yes, that's good.
So hi everyone, I'm Edouard. I'm a data scientist at N26. I've been working there for about 2 years now. And we started working on a chatbot project early 2018. And basically today, I did the very technical stuff to Rasa, and I thought what could be interesting is, since we launched our chatbot live in the web app last week, tell you about, all about the challenges that we faced actually putting a chatbot from prototype to production, and there were quite a few. Yeah, so feel free to ask me if you have any questions during the presentation, because I might be using some words specific to N26, and I'd rather have it clear for everyone what I'm saying, basically. So yeah, just a general introduction. Super quick slide. Why do we want a chatbot? So basically, we wanted to have customer service that can scale in line with our growth. So we in hypergrowth, we have lots and lots of customers coming in, and we can't keep up with the load of customer service requests we have. So chatbot seems like a natural solution. We can also offer some sort of natural language querying. So lots of people, when they have simple questions, they still want to talk to an agent. So if they want to upgrade their customer, their card, sorry, they come and ask us, hey, what is the price for the new card? Even though it's really publicly available on our website, obviously. But that's okay. And we can also offer 24/7 support. So that's something we couldn't have. So it's really nice if you are on the other end of the world. you lost your card, time zone difference makes you like unable to contact an agent, you can actually get some sort of help and like ensure you don't, I don't know, get your cat skinned. So why a chatbot? That solves it. And so the technologies that we use, so we use something called Nomad. So Nomad is our container orchestration tool. It's kind of a competitor to Kubernetes. We ship everything with Docker, and like the code is obviously Python because we use the Rasa stack. And quickly for the architecture, so it's I realize it's way too small for anyone to see anything, but I'm gonna I'm gonna say it anyway. So we have a front end top left, then we use Twilio in the middle, and then we have a router that will either forward the traffic to the chatbot or to Salesforce. So Salesforce is our like customer management service that we use. So like all our customer service agents use Salesforce to chat with our customers. And I'm gonna come back to that point as well, is we wanted to build an architecture that was very smooth and very easy to like escalate to an agent. And so that's one of the challenges that we faced. That was very important to us to like create absolutely no frustrations with the user, because we're a bank, and the last thing we want is just having users like stop using our service because they had bad customer service experience. We also, so I'm in the dotted line, you see the chatbot. So yeah, okay, it's impossible to read, but we have Rasa Core and Rasa NLU. We actually decided to split them up just because it was easier to actually work in parallel. So we could have different people like creating training data for two different projects. So it's really two different GitHub repos. It's much easier for us to decouple like working on NLU or working on Core. So in the beginning, we were mostly working on Rasa NLU because we had a lot of customer data. So it was easy for us to create a like natural language understanding like model. And we've been working on Rasa Core a lot recently because we want to improve the flow of our conversations. So that's it. And remember, so the router was really here to help us escalate to agents because we didn't want to just plug in the front end to like our chatbots and be completely stuck, basically. So that's it. Yeah. So some requirements that occur during like putting the project from prototype to production is actually something that you mentioned, is testing a lot the model, like so evaluating the models. So this is something that we found was very helpful. We are actually using the old version of Rasa Core evaluation, sometimes cryptic because the fail stories didn't tell you which fail stories it was. So it was hours of debugging, but now it's solved. It's good. Yeah, so this is very important. I don't have a slide for it, but you may need to remember to mention this. So it's nice because we can have actually confidence and faith in the model that we have. So we have a set of lots of actually testing stories, I think over 100 stories in our case. And we just check that all the flows like match. And it's also nice, but then so since we're a bank, we are like, we kind of have a contract, like indirect contract with BaFin, which is the regulator in Germany. And basically we can show, hey, like that's the flows that we can say, and that's how the bots like behave, basically, because the last thing we want is also like having a bot that just goes crazy and says weird things to customers. And this really allows us to say that's how the bot behaves for like these flows. So another thing that we thought was very helpful is instead of having just plain text, we added some events on top of the text that the bot utters to kind of control the conversation. So I think you mentioned at some point the handover or handoff to a human. And this is for us super important. That was really at the core of what we built. And we have some different events that I'm going to go through and explain what they mean. So basically, when the bot sends a message, you can like have three types of events. So it's continue, escalation available, and escalation request by bot. So continue is the bot is confident, knows what it's doing, so it just continues the conversation. Escalation available is the fallback policy. So we put a high threshold on Rasa NLU, I think 0.8 and 0.3 on Rasa Core, to make sure that when the bot actually says something, we're like sufficiently sure that it is what the user expects. So as soon as, for instance, we don't understand the sentence, so in this case, I like Ashram in ping pong, the NLU confidence wasn't high enough, and so we want to escalate right away. So it's always like a trade-off. Do we escalate a lot of people, but then the bot is useless, or do we escalate no one, but then users are frustrated? So it's a trade-off, and we're gonna like tune those parameters to see where we can get the best results, obviously. And then escalation request by bots is some flows. For instance, for N26, if you want to change your email address, you have to talk to an agent. It's a requirement. So the bot can ask all the relevant questions, and that's actually super helpful for like the handover to a customer agent. But then when the bot gets to the end of the flow, we have for some specific utterances, an escalation request by bots, and then the customer is put in contact with an agent, and that's solved the case. One thing we did notice though is maybe actually the Rasa guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no, except for the restart command, there was no command that would allow for a deterministic utterance. So I couldn't find like one. So we actually had to hard code it in front end. So when people like say /human, we get an event called escalation requests, and then the bot shuts up and we escalate to an agent. So we thought of kind of copying the actual like the restart mechanism, but it was like very risky. It was a lot of code to change a lot of different files. So I'd rather like just hard code in the front end. And in the future, we're thinking of having a button that's always present in the chat window where people can just click it and escalate. But again, it's this trade-off of having everyone escalate and having no one escalate, basically. So graceful failure was very important to us. That's the first thing. And I think this concept of events really helped us get there. Another thing is we wanted to have a conversation goal. So I think, Rasa, you call it the user goal, or like the purpose, basically, of a user when they start a conversation. And for us, it has multiple like uses, because we can then first store the different types of conversation that the user had. And so like to see the proportions of each type of conversation, and then improve on it. So basically, in the tracker, Rasa stores all the intents that come from the user. And so it's nothing fancy. We just take the first non-conversational intents that we pick up. And so we have basically a list of conversational intents. We take the first intent that doesn't point to that list. And this is actually super helpful because it helps us for our reporting to know what stories need to be improved. So if we see, for instance, for like card reorder, like everyone has to escalate to an agent, that's what we want to avoid. So we like focus on this kind of story. And finally, one other use for this is we're not there yet, but as we grow, I think we're going to have a product that's more and more complex. So we might want to route to different agents when people escalate, depending on the problem that people have. And so we could just pass that on to Salesforce and then just route to the appropriate user agents. So that's super nice. It's built in. Yeah, we just basically have a custom output like file channel that like does all of this for us. Yeah. So like I mentioned, the escalation tag, the routing to an appropriate specialist and reporting on most common escalation. So now in the UI, so as soon as you put like /human or you click on the buttons to escalate, you have a little animation like to like make you wait. We're trying to see how we could improve that, because lots of people just have like the reflex to just type /human. Like they just think, hey, it's better to talk to a human in any case, even though sometimes for some languages, like the waiting time can be, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. So we're trying to think of ways to like, not convince, but trying to have the users give the bot a shot. And so maybe one of the ways could be to just like show an average waiting time or things like that. And actually a case that I saw that was pretty funny, on a Sunday, our customer service is closed. So people just like typed /human right away. And then we said, hey, no agent is available. So that person came back to the bot, like closed the window, came back to the bot, and then actually solved their case, because it was a very chargeback problem. And all they had to do was to send in a form, and that's it. So we have, again, to like find ways to really have users give the shot a bot. And yeah, so it's going to be a lot of educating the user, but yeah, I think it's worth it. And also something we have that's quite nice is when we escalate to an agent, we also pass the transcript of the conversation that user had with the bot. And so it's built into Salesforce, so it's very easy for agents to see what the context was. Also with the entities, we haven't implemented it yet, but we want to highlight when the entities were picked up, and to also like give an easy to read transcript to like the customer service agent, to in the end reduce the average handling time of conversations. So I'm gonna come to the metrics that we have in place to like try and improve the model. But yeah, basically having this transcript really helps us if the bot is not good enough to solve the case. Still helps us down the line. Like we don't consider it a failure if people didn't solve their case with the bots, because again, we're a bank and like lots of things need to be done by an agent. But if we can gain time for like both the user and the agent, it's still a win for us. Yeah, so this is quite tedious, but basically we like at 10.6 we store everything using Postgres. So in our output channel, we also like added a few fields. So like the conversation status I was mentioning before. So when people open a window, we just have a customer chat started, and then the events that I mentioned. So continue, escalation requests. and we log everything, of course, to be able to then do some reporting later on. And one thing that we found was helpful is actually in the, I think it's called the user message class in the Rasa core, we also pass a message ID. So I don't know if that's possible now, but we basically pass a message ID that allows us to join all the tables from like the front end all the way down to like Rasa interview. So basically we're sure that we don't lose any messages like along the way. And this is just nicer for us to like know what's going on basically. So yeah, that's very helpful. Also, like we store really everything, and in the future in our reporting, I think we're gonna have like the model versions to see like if we like broke everything or if we re-improve something. So yeah, this is something that we don't log currently. I don't know if it's easily accessible, but we have to see if it's accessible. Yeah. And then finally about the metrics. So like for us, a successful conversation is a conversation where people don't contact CS in any shape or form within 24 hours. So 24 hours is roughly the time that customer service considers to be one case at 1026 anyway. And so our resolution rate is if people like talk to the bots and don't contact us within 24 hours, we assume that we solved their case. This might not be the case because people might be just frustrated and like, I don't know, out of rage, quit and never talk to us again. That's a risk. But yeah, we see that this is like a pretty good metric because just computing people like get like human right away or like at any point in the conversation is not that helpful for us because again, the end goal of having a chatbot really is to take load off of customer service. So if everyone talks to the bot and then everyone sends an email, it's like kind of counterproductive actually. And the other metrics that I wanted to mention is the average handling time. So we have good hope that with time, the chatbot is going to ask all the relevant questions, and that's already the case for like lots of the flows we have the most traffic for. The bot asks all the questions, and then the action is taken by the agents. And so for now, the bot doesn't write to any endpoint, like it doesn't write to any DB or anything. It doesn't take any actions, like per se. It's more like for reads, like publicly available information. Yeah, so that's the extend chatbot capabilities. So for now, and so the MVP, we only give out publicly available information because we want to learn from our mistakes, obviously. Then we want to be able to read personal user information. So have, for instance, if people say, "Hey, I lost my card," we can tell them how long it will take to like ship their card into their current address or something like that. For now, we still ask it, so it could be nicer basically for the user. Then one thing we want to do as well is like make extensive use of deep links in the app, because this takes a risk away from the bots and just gives the power back to the user. If we solve their case with the deep link, it's actually better than having to like double confirm everything like writing. And then when we're extra confident with what we do, we might want to write, but I'd rather be like very cautious with this because again, we're a bank. And so it's not like, I don't know, you order shoes online and like it doesn't arrive. It's like you lose all your money. So like it's a bit yeah, tricky basically to really make sure that the experience is nice and that it's accurate. And also for now, we only have the bots available in the web app in English, but we want to make it available to German and French customers because they're like really a big user base for us as well. And what's very nice is now it's completely like it's very easy to do it with like yeah, like having like action threads on the server and like the natural language generator. It wasn't possible before because the utterances were baked into the model, and now it's just easy for us. We just call different endpoints, and with Docker, it should be like doable. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I really wanted to give a high level like explanation of what we did because it's very easy sometimes to get lost kind of like in like tweaking the model to like gain that 1% accuracy or something like that. But then once you have the perfect model, actually putting it in production, make it viable to be like very reliable and scalable and everything, brings its load of challenges as well. And that's what I've been working on for over 6 months at 1026 now. Cool. So if you have any question, feel free to ask now or maybe come later. Yeah.
I have one question about metrics. If you go back to the So you have implemented this, right?
Yeah.
And what is the average resolution rate and handling time so far?
I'm not allowed to disclose that.
Oh, okay. Basically, I just want to ask scalability, whether it's good.
So I'm not allowed to disclose that, but what do you mean scalable?
Whether this solution could be scalable to your customers.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, again, oh
Okay.
yeah, the question is, can I give out the metrics that I said? And the answer was no. But yeah, again, we're a bank, we're like super sensitive with our data, sorry.
Yeah.
But what I can say is it's good enough that we want to invest more time to translate to other languages. And then like do the next steps, so like read writes, and everything like that. Any other question? Okay, cool.
What is this?
Having a Q&A session now, guys. It's for the next 40 minutes. We're going to be having a panel join me on stage. With anyone volunteers? Yeah, engineers? Volunteers? It's going to be going alternately between, well, if anyone's got in the room to got a question. We've also got questions from the stream, so there's a bit of a dead spot for the reading through. But if anyone wants to start with a decent question.
You said you have lots of users in China now. So are you thinking about using Chinese language for your chatbot, or have you already started using it?
Yeah, I mean, of course, yeah. So to repeat the question, because it's probably quite relevant for people who are calling in. So the question was, we have a growing user base in China. What are we doing in terms of Chinese language? So I know that a lot of Chinese language users were using MITI because one of the contributors built quite a nice MITI language model for Mandarin, which is actually probably the main reason we haven't pulled MITI out yet, because it doesn't, for most other things, it's worse. And so in terms of, you can use the TensorFlow embedding pipeline for any language provided you can tokenize it. So if you have a decent Chinese tokenizer, you can use the embedding. And there's an open source one that's fairly widely used. So insofar as I'm aware, that seems to be the way to go for doing both Mandarin and Cantonese. We've even seen projects with mixed Cantonese and English.
We got a question from Subic here. It says, do you guys ever look into traditional classifiers like a decision tree or support vector machine against Keras for action prediction?
For action prediction, we did. I think there's a scikit-learn policy, right?
Yeah, I think at some point we tried SVMs for the action prediction. I don't think we ever tried decision trees, though. At least not in a more elaborate,
I remember someone in the community like a year ago just did logistic regression, and that worked quite well for their purposes. Because the point is, so the reason we use an RNN is because it's naturally a sequence problem, right? You have this history of dialogue, and you need to predict something. But you can, of course, also just flatten that out into a flat vector, and then just use those as individual features just farther away. So sky's the limit, and now that we have nice evaluation scripts, you can try every model that's implemented in scikit-learn and do an exhaustive search. Yeah.
So nowadays, a lot of chatbots, like of the task-oriented chatbots, are using this 4-component framework with NLU, Dialog state tracking, policy learning, and NLG. However, there are a few papers and a few products also that use an end-to-end models using either supervised or reinforcement learning. So are you planning on getting some work on it or not?
Cool. So the question was, are we also looking into end-to-end dialogue models in addition to looking at separate NLU tracking dialogue NLG? So my take on NLG is that NLG in and of itself is not especially useful, But having an end-to-end model, like NLG is useful because it lets you have an end-to-end model. Because what it means by having an end-to-end model that you can train on fully unannotated transcripts of conversations. So just what one human said and what another human said. So that's the advantage of the end-to-end approach. The dialogue state tracking piece is one that our tracker is very simple. It says, what's the latest value that we got for a slot, and just store that. A lot of the earlier work on dialogue state tracking focused on probabilistic methods because there was so much uncertainty in speech recognition. So you go back 10 years, you had 35% word error rate on speech recognition, and then you had to deal with the uncertainty in the words you picked up. So there's a lot of work there that, for the cases we deal with is not as important. One of the other benefits of end-to-end, of course, is that you no longer need to define intents. And that's obviously a big advantage, right? Because if you really think about scaling out to more and more use cases and like deeper and deeper edge cases, having to define an intent for absolutely every single message is kind of not ideal, and you want to work with a more flexible representation of meaning. So I would say it's an area we're looking into, and certainly on our roadmap and something we'll be working on, but it's not something that we're pressing on with in the near future.
It's also something we keep in mind when making any architectural decisions, keeping in mind that at some point we might switch to end-to-end instead of having these separations. So yeah, it's something we keep in mind and try to accommodate early.
Yeah, I think more likely that in the near future we go directly from user utterance to action, but not to then also generating the response. Because it's so much harder to train a neural network to generate 5 ways to say something than to just type 5 ways of saying that thing.
We got a classic one from the stream here. Why the name Rasa?
You want to take it?
No.
Yeah, so it comes from tabula rasa. It means blank slate, which means that you don't know anything until you learn or until you have experiences. So, I think it's kind of appropriate for a machine learning toolkit. We've also learned from a bunch of people in the community that in so many languages around the world, Rasa means something. And so far, it's always been something positive. So if anybody is from a culture where Rasa means something rude, I'd love to hear that.
Have you someone had a question?
Yeah, so you showed this interactive learning, right? And you also showed that it's possible to go back to the history of this interactive learning. But so the question is, if I want to train my chatbot live, right? Is it better to have different sessions within the same training file, or the bot tends to learn better if you just go back and forth and try to expand, like this graph that you showed on the slide? Are there some differences?
Okay, so the question is, in interactive learning, in the mode we showed, is it better to have one session and then explore different parts of the conversation graph, going back and forth, or is it better to kind of finish an interactive learning session, kind of stop it, and then go back to it later? And the answer really is it shouldn't make a difference. So the graph was created from the existing training data. So in your kind of running interactive learning session, you add to that training data, kind of updating that graph. But when you kind of finish it, you dump the stories. They get to be part of your new training data. And then when you restart, that data gets loaded again, and it's kind of part again of the visualization. For the training, we've come to realize that it's better to not online train the model, so kind of keeping the model the same, not kind of training during the interactive learning. It's not too useful. It's better to do the interactive learning, do the session, dump the training data, and then retrain the model. Has several reasons. Usually, yeah, it's easier.
So I have a question for the new intent classification with intensive instead of the old machine-based one. I wonder how it's possible that this one is better, because it's just based on actually a training set. It's not. Because I understand it's not using any pre-trained information.
Mhm.
Doesn't that mean that if you haven't specified a certain keyword in your training set, there's no way this will be recognized when the user is actually using it?
Yeah, as you're totally right. So the question was, how is it possible that the TensorFlow embedding pipeline is better than the one with pre-trained word embedding, so Spacey, for example? I mean, the answer is that it's not just universally better, right? And there's obviously a trade-off, and there's a kind of crossover point, depending on how much training data you have and how complex your training data is. So if you're talking about fruits and you've got apples and bananas in your training set, and then somebody asks about pears, then Spacey will know that pears is very close to apples and bananas, right? But your TensorFlow model won't. So if you have like really new vocabulary, you lack that, right? That's something that you're missing. On the other hand, a lot of things that might colloquially or like in informal language be the same in Spacey or just in a generic word embedding model might be really different for your case, right? So in a banking example, if you think about the word balance, it's very closely related to like words like money and cash and transfer, right? But it's in the sort of usual use of the word balance, it has nothing to do with that, right? It's about symmetry and weight.
Couldn't you use the best of both worlds using pre-trained vectors and like the TensorFlow base?
Yes, so the question was, can't you get the best of both worlds using the ranking part of TensorFlow and the pre-trained embeddings? There is. Of course, there's like the memory cost of having the pre-trained embeddings. But there's a really cool blog post on using, from Scalable Minds, on using pre-trained like sentence embeddings with the ranking approach. So it's totally possible to get the best of both worlds.
Okay, we've got David McDougall on the screen asking, what are the best practices for using a multi-language bot?
I think we should let you answer that.
You want to answer? I can answer.
No, actually, if you want to answer, that'd be great. Really strange.
Yeah, I mean, so should I repeat the question or no?
Yeah, why not?
So the question is like, what do you need to like both build a multilingual chatbot? And so now it's like modular enough that you can just like configure everything with like YAML file for like the endpoints that you hit. So like for us, it's really easy. For instance, since we have decoupled everything, we just have different endpoints for different languages for the NLU parts, and then it's just like a lot of endpoint mapping, and that's fine. I guess the biggest challenge for us is like the content management, because if you have stories, do you want them to work for like all your languages or not? So coming up with like a super nice content management tool, we haven't found a solution yet to like to have something where we could just have like basically flags, for instance. So like let's say you have so in our case we have like 3 different markets, so like Europe, US, UK. We have like 3 languages, and then we also want to have chatbots for like users that are authenticated and not authenticated. So like that's where you get complexity, because you might want to have like models that like share the same basis, but then some models have like more data than others. And I guess for that, the biggest challenge for me for multilingual is just having consistent models and like really maintaining a lot of code. And you just have to make sure that you do it in a smart way to like have the same data available like in all languages. Like the biggest challenge. So when we started working on this project at N26, we wanted to have a bot like right away in like English and German, and we realized that the amount of code to maintain was horrible, basically. And we decided to like just only focus on English because it was easier also as part of the team to all work on it. And now like definitely multilingual is the next challenge, basically. But now honestly, like with the setup that you have, like everything in like config files and like the NLG bit, it's super easy to have a bot just utter in different languages.
Thanks.
Can you comment on domains and subdomains? I mean, you mentioned that in the introduction.
Yeah. So the question is, what about domains and subdomains? So there are a lot of different dimensions to that question. And what we get a lot of the time is people say, okay, now I've added new use cases and I now have 3 different bots and I have a kind of meta bot that coordinates between them. I don't think that simplifies anything. I think what are your real goals? I think one is that you can have kind of independent updates, or at least it's the same as like if you're working together on a large code base, you want to have good test coverage. right? So I think actually enhancing these evaluations is a really important piece of scaling out to multiple domains. And the way we think about it as well, as we showed in those earlier slides, is that actually you can reuse a lot of the important conversational information across those different domains, and you don't really want to have hard boundaries between them. So we're more on the side of keep it in one bot, but have traditional sort of good software practices of lots of tests and working on things independently. But we're also curious about how far you can push that and where it breaks down. So we're doing some experiments to kind of try and break that model and see where it really stops working.
Okay, Suvik again. Is this single Docker command setup similar to Docker Compose?
Yes, I mean, it's going to be a Docker Compose.
Maybe repeat the question.
Is the single Docker command similar to Docker Compose? So it's going to be a Docker Compose file, so listing the different services, connecting core, connecting NLU, probably duckling as well, and your application server for your custom actions. So that's going to be a Docker Compose file, and then kind of the single command would be starting Docker Compose with that service definition, linking the different services, and then exchanging kind of your action code in the application.
Yep. I'm not a software engineer, but rather from the machine learning side, and I tried for a month now to work with Rasa. And as you was shown, like you can log all the messages, and you create training data from the interactions with the bots. So this is if you're not really from the architecture side, it's a tricky question for me how to set it up that I can log everything if I'm using, for example, some kind of Slack or Telegram bot. How to then log all the user inputs, and or is it even supposed to be logged, or is it forbidden now to be logged? So I go through it where I have to go into and get it into the code. So I don't know if it's an easy question, you can answer it. Otherwise,
there's a kind of different.
Repeat the question.
Oh yeah. How do you get the conversation data out of Rasa core from kind of different conversations? And there's different kind of sockets or kind of connection points you can connect to get the data out. There's one that's just logging to a file, so all the conversations are logged to a file by default. Then there's kind of the tracker store, kind of that keeps all the trackers persisted, right? So I think default we've implemented Redis and Mongo. So the trackers will be in there and you can access them from there. A tracker really is just a large list of events, kind of user utterance, action executed, slots, kind of all that stuff. So kind of all the information you need to like reconstruct that conversation. And something we've added recently is kind of an output of these events as a stream. So you can actually connect, so we use Pika for that, and you can connect a message queue like Kafka or some other message broker. And kind of all these events that we lock onto the tracker are getting emitted through that event stream, and then you can kind of consume that at another end and kind of write it to another format or kind of do your analysis on that, whatever you want to do with it.
But I think maybe a fair summary is that we could make it easier.
We could make it easier. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. Nahid Alam asks, is there any plan on adding an online training option, i.e. updating models on the fly?
Yeah, so the question is there any, wait, I think we need some clarity. Because now I'm not sure. So the question was, is there any...
I think he means like during the interactive training, obviously.
Well, that's what I think the person means. So the question is there any plan for doing training on the fly? And if that refers to in interactive learning, yes, that already works. It's just a flag that says, I can't remember the name of the flag. Fine tune, it's called, and it will fine tune the model every time you give it some feedback, and it will actually retrain the model. If the question is training without a developer supervising it from the user conversations, no, not yet. That's further in the future.
the new version of the action forms, can you just escape the path? Like if you just suddenly think you want to do something else, that you get out of there?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you escape from the form in the new forms implementation? So this is a really good question, and it kind of goes to the heart of how we implemented it. And we decided to make the forms extremely conservative. So basically the form is active, it requests some information from you, and unless it's able to validate that information and say it's exactly what it was looking for, it will just give up, and it just says action rejected. And then Rasa core receives that event and says, okay, let me choose the next best action. So I'm not going to use this form thing. So if it's anything other than directly what the form asked for, it will just fall back to your policy to predict what's the next thing to do.
Another one from the stream. Hussam Kutina asks, hi, are there any plans for implementing a domain classifier or an easy way to incorporate multiple agents in one conversation?
You want to take it this time?
Okay, it's multiple domains again. I think we answered that already. Kind of, we'd rather go for a larger domain having all the parts in one bot than to have several bots and then kind of one bot at the front that kind of distributes the messages. So we're working on making that easier to create like kind of this large bot that uses all the training data and reacts to all the different use cases instead of splitting up into multiple bots, which might still mean that you can have multiple domains, but in the end, it will train like kind of one model. But yeah.
Okay. Is it in the Rasa roadmap to have the ability to run Rasa-based bots running offline on a mobile device?
So the question is it on Rasa's roadmap to run offline on a mobile device? It's on the long-term roadmap, maybe, yeah. It's not something we're working on immediately. I mean, partly, of course, that we're part of the Python ecosystem. There are mobile operating systems where you can run Python. And there are things like TensorFlow serving, where you can deploy TensorFlow models to a mobile device using C++, but then we would have to port all of the other Rasa stuff, like tracking conversations and turning it into X and Y to like C++ or Swift or Java, well, presumably C++. So no, but you can already run it on things like a Raspberry Pi or on other things where you actually have a Python runtime. Not offline on a mobile device anytime soon.
Oh, we got another classic one here from Azar Ali Zain. He says, hi, say hi to Philip. And then, can you tell us how much of Rasa is cloud versus what percentage is on premise, if you have any such thing?
You want to take it?
Oh, I'm not sure I understood the question correctly.
So how much is run in-house versus what data do we collect and use in the cloud for our service?
Okay, so how much data do we collect from Rasa users? I think none at the moment. So kind of everything is run on premise. So you set up your own Rasa core, you set up your own Rasa NU, and kind of we don't get any data from that. What we're thinking about right now, we're not sure we're going to do that, is kind of getting some usage data in a general sense, like kind of how large is the model, how many intents. So just for us to see, okay, how are the models used? What are the use cases for the different models? But we're not even sure we're going to do that. But might help us improve models. But yeah, even that like small part of the data, we're not sure we're going to use. Because it's an open source project and kind of data is really sensitive. And yeah, we're really careful about that.
Okay, we've got some more technical ones here. David McDougall says, what's better for writing stories, full listings of steps or using the checkpoint shortcuts?
Well, I have an opinion. So the question is, what's the better way of writing like longer and more complex stories, writing full stories or using checkpoints? I think checkpoints can be useful, but they're also like a really sure way path of making things very complicated to reason about. Because if you have a file with 100 checkpoints, it's kind of like having code with 100 go-to statements. So use them sparingly and when they're useful, but maybe don't kind of reinvent the wheel. At least, I mean, maybe if it works for you, that's cool. But if you ask for my advice, I would say go to interactive learning, look at the real conversations people have, and build your training data from that rather than building out all the checkpoints.
Nahid Alam says, do we have an Apache Kafka connector?
Okay, the question is, do we have an Apache Kafka connector? The question is for what? For emitting events, yes. So kind of any conversation updates to trackers that can be emitted to Kafka. For storing conversations, I don't think Kafka would be the best solution, to be honest, because Kafka is really meant to be used as an event processor, for storage, for distribution, but not really for storing kind of these persistent objects. So I wouldn't use it for that use case, but if you want, you can connect that as a new connector.
Any more questions from the room? Okay, I'll get back to this one. We've got a question from Samuel Gauss. He says, when will the pizza be here? Some way. Have a clear idea.
About 10 minutes late, so 10 past off.
Okay.
45.
Okay.
I have a question. So you mentioned a couple of things on your short-term roadmap. Do you have things on your longer-term roadmap that you haven't talked about?
So the question is, we talked a bit about our short-term roadmap. What about the long-term roadmap? I will say that it's along the same idea. So we think of what's currently not possible, what are the limitations of the tech that's out there right now, and how do we remove those, right? And some of the pieces that may form part of that would be things like end-to-end learning, would be things like reinforcement learning. But more concretely, it's just about kind of seeing where these things break and then pushing forward with the next generation.
I just want to ask, will there be any modification in your mind regarding to how you make the story? Right now, if I understand it correctly, you advise using interactive learning, or maybe just make it manually. But yeah, I just want to know if you have something in mind to modify it in a major way to make the story.
Yeah, so the question is if we plan to modify the format that we write stories in. At the moment, no. So there might be better ways of representing it, but we're not thinking about changing that.
Got a question at the back there?
Hi, so over the last half year, you released a new policy or a new model for NLU. You just talked about the new model for handling dialogue. Can we expect to see changes or new models for entity recognition anytime soon?
It's a very good question. So question is, we shipped new models for intent recognition and new policy architectures. Then the follow-up question is, what about entities? Are we pushing any new models for entities out? So we actually had a very bright intern work with us over summer from Stanford, and they worked on a whole bunch of different things around entity recognition. And we looked at a whole bunch of different neural architectures and things like that. And to build something which is really much better than a CRF, especially on the kinds of data sets that people really have, is really tricky. So what we'd love to do is provide more pre-built, pre-trained entities for the things that everybody needs. We've heard plenty of feedback about the limitations of Duckling, which is a really great piece of software, but of course isn't perfect. So all of those things are really important. I think in terms of like pre-built entities, there's a lot of work to be done. But in terms of like models to train your custom entities, I think we really need a proper breakthrough for something to beat the CRF, to be honest.
Another question from Ashley Callan. He's asking how to get Rasa Core working on an existing website and also integrating it with a single sign-on.
All right, so how do you get a Rasa bot onto a website and integrate it with single sign-on? So Rasa itself isn't kind of connected to the web page directly and doesn't like have any authentication. So the one that is handling that is usually the chat channel. So in this case, you would need a chat channel that supports single sign-on, like does the user verification, authentication, and then kind of sends these messages to Rasa Core for handling. So kind of that would be kind of a chat server, and I'm not sure there's chat servers out there that use single sign-on, but probably yes, so I think there is. And then it's only a question of how to get the messages from that chat server to Rasa Core, which then depends on that chat server, but shouldn't be.
Okay, well, I think that wraps it up. I mean, it's our fake time for.
Sounds good. Awesome.
The next step, which you may have seen on our agenda, that it's time for an epic Rasa party. So yes, I'd invite you to stand up, grab a beer, have some snacks. People in the can't wait to see you guys at Rasa Summit 2019.
Yeah.